Good day everyone. Today we are going to tackle about the ethics of utilitarianism or teleology.
Consequentialism is one of the major theories of moral philosophy, a philosophical claim that the morality of all action is judged by whether its result in right or wrong consequences. When we say consequentialism, it focuses on the consequence. It is a theory that says whether something is good or bad depends on its outcomes. All action that brings about more benefit than harm is good, while an action that causes more harm than benefit is not. For instance, most people would agree that lying is wrong. But if telling a lie would help save a person's life, consequentialism says it is the right thing to do. Again, consequentialism or consequentialist theory is one of the narrative ethics theories that try to answer the ethical question about right or wrong and how we arrive at this answer. It determines whether to do or not to do something based on the expected result of the action. If the expected result is good, then it's ethically right to do. If it's bad, then it is wrong. The theory is subdivided into three types, which are the ethical egoism, ethical altruism, and utilitarianism. When we say ethical egoism, it is explained that as long as the action is good to the person who carries the action out, it's right. In the case of ethical egoism, consequences of the action are considered to be good if they bring benefits to the agent. And when we say ethical altruism, it explains as long as the action is good to everyone else, it's right. In this case, ethical altruism explains everyone benefits except for the agent. And lastly, utilitarianism explains as long as the action is good to everybody, including the person who carries the action, it's right. And this explains that happiness for everyone is the best possible outcome. Ethical Hinduism. It is a philosophy that regards pleasure and happiness as the most beneficial outcome of an action. Ethical Hinduism explains about happiness to everyone. It is a claim that all and only pleasure has positive importance, and all and only pain or displeasure has negative importance. In other words, more pleasure and less pain is ethical, while more pain and less pleasure is not. Ethical Hinduism is first described by ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus. He also explained that at least some pleasures are rooted in natural law, and as a rule, every pain is bad and should be avoided, and every pleasure is good and should be preferred.
Utilitarianism. A utilitarianism is a theory of moral philosophy that is based on the principle that an action is morally right if it produces a greater quantity of good or happiness than any other possible action. A utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choices is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number, or the greatest number of persons. It is how we should evaluate a wide range of things that involve choices that people face. Example of utilitarianism is that all teachers should take a utilitarianism approach also in teaching. This means that in classroom setting, the teacher will do whatever it takes to make sure that the majority of the class is succeeding academically. So, there are four principles of utilitarianism. First, the principle of consequences. It is the moral value of the act depends solely on expected consequence of this act. The principal consequences is that whenever an act is morally right, it depends only on consequences. The morally right action is the one who ought to perform is the one that produced the greatest overall positive consequences for everyone. Example for this principle of consequences is, for instance, most people would agree that lying is wrong, but if telling a lie would help save person's life, the consequentialism says that it is right thing to do. Next principle is the principle of utility. It is when evaluating possible consequence of the act, the criterion is utility, the good that act brings. The principle of utility is the principle that actions are to be judged by their usefulness in this sense, like an tendency to produce benefit, the advantage, the pleasure, the good, or the happiness. Example of this principle is if you are choosing ice cream for yourself. So in this view of utilitarianism, you should choose the flavor that will give you the most pleasure. It is the principle of utility. The third principle is the principle of hedonism or pleasure. The good that an act should bring is a pleasure or happiness. So example of this principle of hedonism is that if you are choosing ice cream for yourself, the utilitarian view is that you should choose the flavor that will give you the most pleasure. If you enjoy chocolate but hate vanilla, you should choose chocolate for the pleasure it will bring and avoid vanilla because it will bring displeasure to you. So that is the principle of hedonism. The fourth principle, the social principle. It is that counts in moral consideration is not only an individual pleasure of an agent, but a happiness of every potentially involved person, the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. Example in the hospital scenario. And the question is, should you kill the fat man? So in a utilitarian moralist would suggest that the proper action is to kill the fat man, thereby saving 5 other lives, because the sum total of happiness is the greater in that outcome. So the social principle does not consider the individual happiness, but it is about having the greatest happiness for the greatest good or for the greatest number of people.
Hedonic Calculus by Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy was the father of utilitarianism, a moral theory that argues that actions should be judged right or wrong to the extent they increase or decrease human well-being or utility. Jeremy believed that utility should be quantitative. An action is moral if it produces the most pleasure of pain. And so, he developed the utility of hedonic calculus. This measured the amount of pleasure in any given scenario. It looked for the following 7 criteria to be met. Number 1 is intensity. Intensity is how intense it is, or intensity, how intense is the pleasure or pain. Number 2, duration. How long it was, or how long it lasts. Duration, how long does the pleasure or pain last? Number 3, certainty or uncertainty. Certainty is how probable is it, or certainty is what is the probability that the pleasure or pain will occur. Number 4 is propinquity. Propinquity means how near or remote. Propinquity is how far off in the future is the pleasure or pain. Number 5. Fecundity. Fecundity is lead to further pleasure. Fecundity is what is the probability that the pleasure will lead to the other pleasure. Number 6 is purity. How free from pain is it? Or purity is what is the probability that the pain will lead to other pains. Number 7, extent. Extent is how widely it covers, or how many persons are affected by the pleasure or pain. Using this calculus, Bentham believed it was possible to measure the amount of pleasure or pain that an action will bring out. This became known as the act utilitarianism. What is act utilitarianism? Act utilitarianism is a utilitarian theory of ethics that states that a person's act is morally right if and only if it produces the best possible result in that specific situation.
And that's all for the topic of ethics of utilitarianism. Hope you learned something, and thank you for listening.